all that. But that's how you got HEX.
Yep.
Free claim to Bitcoiners, adoption amplifier. PulseChain, if you hold Ethereum, you're going to get a little bit of dust. You're not going to get much. And it's more of just like hey, check your wallet, and just maybe enough to transact in the first few months or year or so before we assume it appreciates. And the sacrifice phase, obviously. That's no expectations, but apparently people who sacrifice, they're on a list. You're on the good list. You're not on the naughty list. You're on the good list, and the good list may be rewarded with tokens based on all these different X's and stuff. Hedron, minute with HEX stakes, right? And we talked about how that distribution model, some of the wells in HEX, if they can mint a whole lot of it, that's also an opportunity. It could be on the downside as well, at least in the beginning. Maxi, you could trade HEX for Maxi 1-for-1 during the launch phase, I guess you would call it, sacrifice phase, something like that. And then, of course, you can buy it on the market. And then Pulse Dogecoin. This is one that I think is notable because of the distribution phase, where the whales and the turtles. So the whales are like the whales, the richer ones. The turtles are like the poorer ones, the ones that have less, less stakes or smaller stakes, all that stuff. And then the dolphins and squids, this is kind of like stake wrap nomenclature, I guess. The dolphins and squid, the lower and the upper middle class, they get the most free claim PLST. So in that way, the theory is that you could prevent a lot of the dumping that come from whales who are taking profit or for whatever reason. And then people who are, maybe less interested in the system or have less of a stake in it, the turtles, they would get less to dump because maybe, I don't know, I feel like we're doing like a philosophical, like what do poor people do with money and what do rich people do with money type of thing too. But it is an interesting economic study as well in these kinds of things. There is some overlap. Anyways, it rewards the people who may use it the most wisely in the best interest for the coin. That's the ideal. And that's what struck me as the most interesting thing about the coin. Meme coin, whatever, it's on Pulse eventually, whatever, weird website thing with the other coin, whatever. But the distribution phrase I thought was very thoughtful and a cool economic experiment. So what have you seen as far as the distribution models? What do you think is most interesting? What do you think has the most fundamentals for the coin? Like if you're creating a new coin from today, what do you think you would use or kind of optimize for?
Yeah, so I'll share my thoughts, some thoughts I had probably a while ago about distribution models. And essentially what a distribution model is, from implied from its name, is who do we want to give our initial set of coins to jumpstart the community or the ecosystem that we're trying to build, right? So we want to give our coins to people who will prop up and utilize our system, do positive things for it, versus people who would just dump the coins. So an example of a perpetually dumped coin from history would be like Bitcoin Cash, where they forked Bitcoin and then they just gave everybody their copy, and then people who didn't value the system just dumped it, took their, and then sold off and got their real Bitcoin or whatever. And this was a big reason why Richard has chosen to dilute the supply of Pulse by like 10,000 or like a large factor to 1, so that Ethereum whales did not have the dumping power that like the Bitcoin Cash people had. Now, another set of distribution model could be providing coins through inflation to people who provide liquidity. So you'll notice in a lot of DeFi projects, they'll have very high APRs. If you take their coin, pair it with ETH, USDC, or whatever coin, throw it into a liquidity pool, stake the LP tokens, and then you earn that token as a reward. So the people who are getting those tokens are providing a service to the system by allowing the coins to be traded. That's another traditional kind of distribution model. Now, these HEX derivatives, their distribution model is very specific to the goals that they were trying to obtain. So Hedron gets a lot of flack because it gave whales a very large supply of the very large mintability. Very large supply of the coins that were able to be minted, right?
Especially early whales.
Yes, especially if you had more T-shares, you get more Hedron. You have more T-shares for longer, You get more Hedron. If you're there the first 10 days, you got an 11x on top of all of that, right? It all kind of adds up. But you have to put that into the context of what the goal of the project was. So Alex was trying to create a tokenized derivative or a tokenized representation of a B share. Now, if you're creating a tokenized version of a B share and it needs to reflect what the system actually is, then the people who have the most in that system are just going to have the most of that coin, right? Like if and this was one of the arguments I hear against it from people were saying they shouldn't have given away so much. They should have not blacklisted wallets. In my opinion, if Alex did this, Hedron would be a dead project because it no longer serves the purpose it was trying to come out with, right? It's just a function of the goal. Now, the launch phase bonus, the reason that was in place is because we have 2 entire years of T-shares that have existed before Hedron came into play. So like T-shares that have come into this system and then been burned away minting HEX. So in order to catch up to that, the hyperinflationary period given to the early adopters. So that was that point. Now, the next one, Maxi, the distribution model was tied to its necessity of utility because it was trying to create a ERC20 derivative of an entire stake whose value is tied to its redeemability at the very end of the stake. So in order to accumulate HEX and to serve that function, to even do the stake, you needed to give away a token that could then be redeemed at the end of the stake. So its distribution model, again, like Hedron, is directly tied to this functionality that the problem is trying to solve or the value is trying to give the community.
Right.
PLSD, its distribution model seems to be as a result of its personal thesis in regards to what drives price. As I think it's also a bit of a marketing thing, and this falls into a category that has to do with like marketing. So similar to like the with PulseChain, how it's the largest free airdrop ever to exist. That gets people in the door. You know, like you were saying, people come in and then they're like, oh, they have these free coins. Maybe they're worth something, maybe they're not. But you got that first impression. You market it to people and you got that impression and people are using your system.
Yeah.
I think PLSD, its distribution model was to prove a thesis. A couple theses. One, that the opposite of unit bias is true, where you can have a low supply and a high price, and that would still allow for a large price appreciation, as well as to give tokens to the middle class of a system and seeing how that kind of distribution model works. And because it's a meme token without an explicit utility outside of onboarding new users into the PulseChain ecosystem, that seems like why it had the distribution model that it had. And I think it's perfectly fine. I'm really interested to see how that distribution model plays out over time. And it's had some success. I mean, its price has held up pretty well amongst all this downturn in the market. But yeah, that's a lot of thoughts about what distribution models are, kind of going over the different systems.